glass of water for you.
All right, bye, guys. Let's give it up for the kids.
Yay!
So I imagine that most of you were surprised when you walked into the space tonight and saw this different setup. It is in celebration of our table series that we're kicking off tonight, looking at the amazing things that happen in the Scripture when people sit down at a meal and get to know each other. I had several people tell me on the way in just how much of a family this looks like when we set up the space this way, and I couldn't agree more. I think this is, in a lot of ways, what Woodmont does best, is sitting and talking, getting to know each other, and coupling that with the other thing that Woodmont does best, which is, of course, food. This is something that's right up our alley. And Woodmont does food very well. We've got 5-star dinners. I'm not sure how many other churches can claim they have 5-star meals every week, but we do. We have soup and salad meals next week, every second Sunday of the month, and we invite you next week to stay and have soup and salad with us. Andrew and Stephen and I meet every single Tuesday. We have lunch together to plan the worship service. And in just a couple of weeks, we're going to kick off the Advent season with a tasting party, which if you have not been to it, it's one of the best things that we do all year. We welcome in Advent, kick off the Christmas season by inviting everybody to bring your favorite dessert. And this space is just full of chocolate and peanut butter, and it's awesome. So all of that is just even not mention the nacho fountain at the Super Bowl party. There are a lot of ways that we do food very well at this church. And that's fitting, I think, because so many memories for me happen around tables. Think back to growing up. Think back to holidays that are centered around meals, Thanksgiving and Christmas. All of those special times. Marilette and I were at TCU for homecoming a couple of weeks ago, and all of the times we were going to see people were planned around meals. We got to see this person for lunch and this person for dinner, and we were at one of those meals, and Marilette and I were talking about this restaurant, Joe T. Garcia's. Has anybody been to Fort Worth and been to Joe T's? It's amazing. You have to go. If you're anywhere in the state of Texas, go to Joe T's in Fort Worth. And we were there, and Marilette and I were talking about all of the special memories we had at that place. Marilette had her baptism lunch there. I've been to 4 different wedding rehearsals there. We were there the night that we got engaged, on and on and on. There's something special about the power of the restaurant, or the power of the table, that brings back these memories. And I'm sure if you think about some of your favorite places in Nashville that you like to go and to celebrate your life, surely some restaurants come to mind, or maybe it's just your own kitchen table. I think that's why they say you are what you eat. But I think it's even more important is that you become the people that you eat with, which is why the space is set up this way. Because at the center of our service in a little while, when we take communion, we're going to eat together. We're going to partake in the gift of Christ for each other and become who we eat with. So there's something special that happens when we're at tables. Something special that happens at the soup and salad dinner. If you've come to those monthly dinners, you know that there's just a joy in the air on those nights. And I don't think it's just because you're getting free food, although that might be part of it. But there's a joy in the air. And it's because we're becoming companions together. In some strange way, even if you haven't talked to all the people at your table, you tonight are becoming companions with each other. That's actually what the word companion means. I'm sure our Latin finalist over here, Christina Guilfoy, what was the award you got? Something amazing. Could tell you that the word companion actually comes from 2 Latin words, cum meaning with or together, and panis meaning bread. A companion is literally somebody that you share bread with, somebody that you share bread together with. And that's why Luke, the Gospel of Luke, describes Jesus in this way. In chapter 7, it says, "The Son of Man has come, eating and drinking." Now, of course, people don't like the people that he's eating and drinking with, but they identify Jesus as somebody who's come eating and drinking. Who would you describe among your friends as that person really likes to eat and really likes to drink? It's not even necessarily a flattering term, but that's how they're describing Jesus, somebody who likes to eat and has come to drink. There's a theologian who says that in the Gospel of Luke, every time Jesus is mentioned, he's basically either coming from a meal, or at a meal, or going to a meal, or talking about a meal. One of those four things. Yeah. And think about all the parables that Jesus tells us. How many of them are centered around food? How many of those are using food to help us to understand life itself? Think about perhaps the most famous of all the parables, the prodigal son. What do when the son comes home? They have a banquet. They have a feast. They kill the fatted calf and come and join each other at a table. Why is that? I think it's because, at least in part, table becomes a symbol of who Jesus is friends with. It's a symbol. Jesus sits down and he eats with sinners and prostitutes and lepers and tax collectors. It becomes a symbol of who Jesus has come to be with. So I want you to do just a little thought experiment for a second. What if I told you 1 week from tonight not to come back to church because Jesus is going to be at your house? What would you do? For the next 7 days getting ready, I guarantee you would go home and clean if you're anything like Andra. Probably go around dusting every single little thing, doing the white glove test. Maybe you'd go around and tell all the neighbors, guess who's coming to my house? You're having church people? That's cool. I'm having Jesus. And somewhere you'd start to wonder, I wonder what Jesus likes to eat. Maybe he likes pot roast, or maybe he's more of a lasagna kind of guy. I don't know. He's probably vegan. Start stressing out about what the menu looks like. Clean for the next 7 days. Maybe you'd go home and hide your booze. Or maybe you'd go home and bring out the best wine, depending on how you read the Gospels. But I bet at some point you would start planning that meal and you'd sit down like in that storybook that Andrew was holding up to the kids and just envision yourself sitting at the table with Jesus. And we're not sure, even at the Last Supper, we think about Jesus sitting down and having bread and having wine, but it was actually the Passover meal. I mean, there was a whole banquet served there. It wasn't just bread and wine. Thank goodness. We're not sure what Jesus eats at all of these meals. We're not sure what is served, but the Bible is clear about what happens at all of these meals. There are tender conversations that happens where Jesus starts to bring out the best in people. It's not just a miracle that happens where Jesus just zaps somebody who walks by and all of a sudden they understand the gospel. But Zacchaeus, he has to sit down. They have to experience each other. They have to get to know each other. I don't think the story would really be that powerful if Jesus had just looked up in the sycamore tree and said, Zacchaeus, you're saved, now go give your stuff away. And Zacchaeus goes and does it. It'd be a great story, it'd be a powerful story, but I don't think it would be that meaningful. It's meaningful because we learn that with no great miracle at all, Jesus just sits down and gets to know this person and his life is changed. What does that model for us to do with each other? So Zacchaeus doesn't come to your house 7 days from now, Jesus doesn't go to your house 7 days from now, but he does go to Zacchaeus' house. And I'm not sure how Zacchaeus felt about that, but I do know that Jesus is pretty invasive about it. I mean, how many times do you walk down the street and look up at somebody and say, hey, I'm going to your house today? You don't even give them 2 hours notice. We're going to your house. There are not a lot of celebrities that could get away with that today in Nashville. Give me at least 24 hours notice, Jesus. Now, he invites himself into Zacchaeus' house, but I think what's really happening here, what's more profound, is that he's inviting himself into Zacchaeus' life. And we don't get a lot of notice for that when it happens, when people become part of our lives. We don't know a whole lot about Zacchaeus. It's a very short story. No pun intended. It's a very short story. It really wasn't intended. We know that Zacchaeus is short. That's number one. And number two, we know this about him. He was a chief tax collector and he was rich. And if you're reading the Gospel of Luke, if you just start at Luke, literally chapter 1, before Jesus has ever been born, you see this as pretty much everything you think you need to know about Zacchaeus. Over and over again, Jesus is turning away people who are rich in the Gospel of Luke. We are set up here to not like Zacchaeus. Just the way that story, that line's written, he was rich. Look at all these examples in Luke leading up to Zacchaeus. Luke 1, 6, 12, 20, 16, 18. Just one chapter before here at the bottom is that famous story of the rich young ruler that gets turned away. This rich guy that comes to Jesus, and Jesus turns him away, and he says, "You can't follow me. You're not willing to do that." And so 5 or 6 times now, Jesus has turned away people who are wealthy. And so, Eric, if we go back to that verse about Zacchaeus, everything we need to know about him is summed up in this statement. He was a chief tax collector and he was rich. In Jericho, the equivalent of that for us today, if you're in Jericho and you're a chief tax collector and you're rich, the equivalent today would be something along the lines of you live in Kansas City and you're a Giants fan and you have Ebola. That's everything you need to know about whether you want to hang out with that person or not. And that's where we are with Zacchaeus. But it's clear that something profound and something tender happens, something that causes us to unexpect our expectations, to let go of those expectations. When Jesus takes the time to sit down and to get to know this tax collector, something happens in that house because something is happening in his heart. What do you think it would look like to have a meal with Jesus? I don't know if it'd be one of those long, drawn-out meals that the Spanish people tend to like to have with multiple courses that take hours and hours and hours. I don't know if it would be this delicacy prepared fit for a king and served on a silver platter. Or maybe it would just be bread and wine. But I don't know what would be served, but I know that somehow Jesus finds a way to turn the tables on those whom he is sitting with. It'd be kind of scary to have a meal with Jesus. It would be exciting, and then when you really stop and you think about it, not so certain I would want to have a meal with Jesus if it's going to mean that we have to turn our whole life around like Zacchaeus did. I was in a meeting this week with Roy Stauffer, and he was telling a story, a Celtic legend that Jesus comes to this guy's house. And the guy gets really excited, and he goes out and he tells all his neighbors, "Hey, Jesus is coming to my house." And they all get so excited. And Jesus comes, and he stays for the night. And the first night goes really well, and so the guy who lives in the house, he says, "Hey, Jesus, why don't you stay for a couple more days? You can bring some friends over." And Jesus starts to bring some of his friends over. And Jesus walks in the first night with a couple of prostitutes. And the guy in the house is not very thrilled about it. And the next night, Jesus comes back with a couple of lepers, and the guy's even more upset about it. And then the next day, he comes back with tax collectors, and this time he's just angry. And so he starts to put a message out to Jesus. He lays down a brick. Every time Jesus brings somebody over that he doesn't like, he puts down another brick and another brick. And a couple of days go by, and Jesus brings more of his friends over, and they just stack these bricks higher and higher and higher until at last they've just built a wall. Jesus, you are not welcome here. Take your friends and leave. The irony from that thought experiment earlier about if Jesus came to your house, I think what would happen is we would stress ourselves out for days and days, cleaning, planning, cooking, and then just as we finish the last chore, Jesus walks in. And he wonders why we've gone to all that trouble to change our stuff instead of to change ourselves. We're too busy making everything around us perfect to focus on ourselves. What do you think it is that sets Zacchaeus apart? Why in that long list of passages from Luke, people get turned away and turned away and turned away? These rich people, they get turned away from Jesus. Leave, you can't follow me. And yet Zacchaeus, who's set up the exact same way, sees Jesus. And Jesus says, "Hey, Zacchaeus, I'm going to come live with you. We're going to hang out. We're going to become friends." I think the key is in this little sentence. wanted to see him. How many of us really, truly want to see Jesus? I mean, Zacchaeus doesn't just wait. He doesn't just sit by the road and say, he might come this way. I'm going to just get a glance. He runs ahead of the entire crowd. He climbs up a tree. Imagine how ridiculous he looks, this short little guy climbing a tree in his tunic. He wants to see Jesus. He longs to see Jesus. He says, there's something that's not right with me, and I want to change it. When we go out of our way to see Jesus, we have an unexpected opportunity to welcome him in, not just to our homes, but to our hearts. And when that happens, at the very last part of the story, you remember what Jesus tells Zacchaeus? After Zacchaeus has said he's going to give half of his stuff away. Half of his stuff away. Jesus looks at Zacchaeus and he says, Zacchaeus, salvation has come to your house today. Salvation has come to your house today. Everything that Jesus has done up until now would lead us to believe that this is not what Jesus would say. You're giving away half of your stuff? You stole it all. Give it all back. Give up all your stuff. Go sell all your stuff. And then you can follow me. Why are you giving away half? But there's something authentic within Zacchaeus. There's some longing to be made right. There's something genuine about his desire to be in harmony with his community. And Jesus is able to work with that. He gives him just enough to be able to work with it. Honest intent here seems to be the difference. The rich young ruler wants to be saved, but then when he hears what it takes, he says, I can't do it. But Zacchaeus, without even being asked, he goes and he gives away half of his stuff. He seems to be as eager to do that as he was to climb the tree to see Jesus in the first place. And I think that for us today, in the modern era, who have confused salvation with something that we have instead of something that we do, too many of us would rather climb the tree and see him and hope he doesn't see us. And when he looks at us, when we're up in that tree, just kind of look the other way and hope we didn't make eye contact and say, let's get out of here before he wants to come to my house. Zacchaeus' salvation means going from being a distant observer, where most of us are, if we're honest, a distant observer of Jesus. It means going from that to becoming a faithful disciple of Christ, turning his life around, making a difference in his life because of what he has experienced. John Calvin says that Zacchaeus is changed here. The salvation means that Zacchaeus is changed from being a wolf, not into only just being a sheep, but into being a shepherd. To going out and telling other people with his actions that something has made a difference in his life. So if we're called to be Christ, think about what Jesus does in this story. If we as Christians are called to be Christ, who would we take the time to sit down and understand? Who is being left out? Who is being judged and said, you're not worthy to be part of us? Who are we called to sit down and understand? If you volunteered at Room in the Inn before, you know that the most powerful prayers, the most fascinating conversations take place at that table. And if you haven't done room at the Inn tonight, I encourage you to see Christine Reed sitting over here because they're looking for volunteers. And you give up a Friday night, and you don't just drop off a meal, you share a meal. And that's the power of that experience. Because you get to share a meal with people in the same way that Jesus shared a meal with Zacchaeus. And tables in that moment, when you do room at the Inn, when you sit with somebody at a soup and salad dinner that you didn't understand before, you see that tables have the power to take away our otherness. Our natural human instinct to look at each other and say, I don't need to understand you. I already know everything about you. Tables take away that otherness. To see people for who they really are, to see them for whom God has made them to be. let us break bread together. Honor. Will you pray with me?